Hey everyone. So this is another interview. This time I'm doing one with my friend Paul Voss. He lives in North Carolina and has had a very interesting life. Hey Paul.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm all right. So Paul, let's start with tell me a little bit about your childhood. You know, kind of where you grew up, what your parents did, that kind of thing.
That could be a good long interview all by itself. I grew up in Minneapolis. I was born in May of 1940, so the United States wasn't at war yet, but everybody knew it was coming. I guess I wasn't aware of it, but my parents certainly were. Um, Oh my gosh, it was my parents were pretty poor. They were living in a little flat above a mortuary when I was born. Yeah, right in downtown Minneapolis. Um, Not sure what my dad was doing at that time, but um, I do remember those early days. We were uh, basically living with his parents. So it was me, a new infant for the most part. And we had some other places, but we moved around a lot, ended up with his parents. So it was my mom and dad and my grandparents on my father's side. Mom didn't really get along well with her mother-in-law, so that made for interesting times. In 1944, I believe it was, he was drafted. My mother went to work and she had now had another child. I had a less than a 1 year old brother. She didn't know what to do with the two of us, so she sent us out to South Dakota to live with her cousin while she worked. And my father was mostly in the Philippines during World War II. He came back safely, and our family was reunited, moved back in with his parents. And that's where I really was until the age of 12. Not a very happy household all around. It was my mother and her stepmother and my grandparents themselves. They were immigrants. He was from Germany. She was from Denmark. They never really interacted very much. And this was in the city, but it was the 1940s. And so I would get up in the morning, in the summers at least, and leave the house and come back after dark. And just as a little kid, um, wandering the neighborhoods, picking trash, getting into all kinds of trouble with my one pal across the street. In 1950, 1952, my parents moved to a working class suburb as Minneapolis was beginning to explode in terms of suburbanization. This was the first wave of suburbanization. And we ended up in this little tract development, very small, very modest house. But my dad had worked as a cabinet maker sometime after the war. So we bought it incomplete and then he finished it off. Meanwhile, I had a little baby sister who was born into the family. So there were the five of us who moved into that house. Now it's just as far as the eye can see homes, but at the time it was basically a big old potato field that filled up with these homes. Starting at 12, I worked on summers in the potato field, long hours, usually about 5:30 a.m. to dark. Got paid a nickel a bushel for our potatoes. And the rest of the year, just sort of in school. I played a trumpet in band, so we formed a little band, a little combo. I don't know what you would call it. We mostly tried to do Dixieland jazz, and I did some of that. Claim to fame, I guess, on the trumpet side was our little band opened for Gene Vincent in the Anoka Theater that would have been 1956 or 57. He was an early bopper, but he was killed, I think, in a motorcycle crash. Let me see, where am I? Okay, I'm in high school in a band. At the age of 50, yeah, then the rest of my life, my childhood was kind of, I didn't move out, but at the age of 15, I got a job working in a men's and boys clothing store, and pretty much worked full time, about 30 to 35 hours a week. So every night after school, from essentially 5 to 9, and then on the weekends, and playing in the band and so on. Or I guess it was 4 to 9 every weekday. So I essentially moved out. My father insisted that I pay my mother rent for doing my laundry and making my lunches. So it was just kind of, I was very independent and not a particularly motivated student in high school, but reasonably bright so that I didn't have to do very much to get pretty decent grades. So that's my high school.
And why, why did your family live with your grandparents? Was it your parents just didn't have enough money?
Well, think about it. It was post-war, a lot of military returning. There had been no housing built really to speak of during the war. So there was a housing shortage. So it was that combined with the fact that they didn't have any money that we lived with my grandparents.
Okay. So you moved out at an early age then.
Well, I slept at the house, but essentially was never there.
You were there. And then you ended up going off to college then, or?
Yeah, a little bit of story there too. One of the guys who I'd been playing in the band with and I decided we would try out for the Navy music program. So we were going to go down to Great Lakes Naval Air Station in Chicago from Minneapolis. The Navy sent us bus tickets to go down and audition. And now this is summer of 58. I graduated. And in about July, my friend came and said, I'm in trouble. I've knocked up my girlfriend and I can't go into the Navy. Well, I didn't want to, I just didn't want to do it alone. So I just wrote off to this college and said, I think I'd like to come to college. And they said, okay. Admissions spec in those days was not what it is now. So I went to college. I borrowed some money from the guy at the clothing store where I worked, the guy who managed the little shopping center branch where we were, and headed off to college. Terribly motivated. It was probably the most regrettably bad years in my lifetime. I wasn't a good student. We drank a lot and played a lot of cards, and somehow I made it through. I was going to major in music. I didn't get into the main music program. I wasn't very good on the trumpet, so I didn't know what to do. So I majored in math, which was a really, really good decision because the math major sort of opened up the door. I graduated in 62, hadn't been very good at math, didn't want to continue in math. And the Army was drafting at that point right and left. So I was in touch with my draft board during that period of time. And they would tell me, 6 weeks and you're going to come up. This is before the lottery and all that other stuff. Everybody was eligible for the draft, unless you were doing something critical that got you a deferment. And having had what was called a 2S deferment through college, I was eligible for the draft until age 35. And I didn't want to interrupt my life with that. And I didn't want to end up in the Army. So about 2 or 3 weeks before I was going to be called up, I um, I joined the Navy, and I'm now a college graduate. And I had a friend in college who had flown A-4 attack aircraft off carriers. He'd gone to 2 years at this school, went into the Navy, became a Navy pilot, and then came back to school. So I met him in my junior and senior year. And he said, "Oh man, go down to Pensacola." So not having any goals of my own, I raised my hand. So in August, I'm on my way to Pensacola, Florida, to go through pre-flight training to become a pilot. Let's see, where do I go with that? Still not very directed in terms of my life. Had no idea what I wanted to do. I just didn't know who I was. And fortunately for me, let's see, how do I say this? So I flew for about a year and a half, played in some bands, which sort of slowed me down during that period of time. It was a way to, I knew if I played a trumpet, I carried a trumpet, I didn't have to carry a rifle during the weekly graduations and so on. So I was in the kind of ragtag band in the back while everybody else was pretty spit and Polish. Finished pre-flight, started flight training in Pensacola, and altogether flew for maybe a year or year and a half. And when we were transitioning to jets, it was discovered that both of my frontal sinuses had polyps that prevented a proper clearing of the sinuses. And it was very painful, as if I were flying high, which occasionally in the pre-jet training we did. Navy planes essentially fly high and then fall out of the air and land on a carrier. I mean, that's the life of a Navy pilot. And it was that descent where I would get little vacuums. The rear atmosphere would stick in the sinus cavity, come down into the denser atmosphere, and the little blood capillaries would start to break and stuff like that. So it was very painful. I almost passed out a couple of times. Told the flight surgeon about it, and he said, let's take a look at you. And he said, "You're not going to be able to fly. If you already had your wings, we would probably try to do surgery, but we'd have to go in between the eye and the brain." And he said, it's too tricky. So they said, "You can't fly." Sent me to Air Intelligence School, and then the military, being the military, assigned me immediately to an aircraft squadron. So I ended up flying for the next 3 years. Fortunately, they were low, slow flying aircraft, P2V Neptunes. I was in Air Intelligence, and all of our deployments were to the Mediterranean. And here's where I grew up. I sort of found myself. Spent a total of about a year in southern Spain in the big, what now is a huge naval station. It was a little tired Spanish airfield back in the early 60s. In Rota, but spent time, in Italy, Crete, Sicily. In intelligence, I was periodically assigned to British intelligence. So I spent time in Malta and Gibraltar. I mean, this was my military service while guys were dying in Vietnam. That was me. So when my squadron duty was over, the Navy said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to go to graduate school." And I'd been a pretty good officer. With a math major, I had gotten a patent actually on a device for finding submarines. This was before computers were in these aircraft. So they really liked me, and they said, "We'll send you to graduate school." And I said, "Well, okay." So 66, the Navy sent me out to in Monterey, California. I was married now, didn't have a child yet. But my wife and I ended up living in Carmel, which is kind of a glorious place, a block from the ocean. And I just drove off to the Navy postgraduate school, studying, and again, it's worked sort of like math in terms of later opening doors, operations research, systems analysis. I was I learned how to program very early in the programming era, but I was selling my soul to the Navy. I owed the Navy 6 months for every year of school. And I would have, I didn't want to, no, I owed them a year for every 6 months in school. I owed them a year for every 6 months in school. So at the end of a year, I made it known that I wanted to drop out of school. I didn't want to sell my soul to the Navy. And at that time, this was the closest I came to trouble. My guardian angel was looking after me. Everybody who was leaving the postgraduate school sort of by stepping down was being sent to Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, somewhere. Everyone who I was awaiting orders with ended up in Southeast Asia. As good fortune would have it, the day that my papers arrived in Washington on the desk of in a little bureau called BUPERS, the Bureau of Personnel in the Navy, my detailer, which was the guy who assigned you your next job, had my folder on his table, and an old squadron mate of mine, who had now advanced pretty far, went to Washington and said, I need somebody for a special project who has finished the Navy postgraduate program in systems analysis. And the guy said, well, I don't have anybody like this, but I've got this person who's halfway through the program. And my old friend, Dan Wolkenstorfer, said, I know Paul, I want him. So back to Norfolk rather than Cambodia or Vietnam, and spent my last 2 years, then 67 to 69, working directly under an admiral on some experimental work. They were validating a big model for detecting if there was a sound source, that is a submarine in the water, at a given frequency and a given decibel level and a given depth and all the water conditions and stuff. You all plug that into the model. The question was, where would you hear the sound of that submarine? So I would set up sea trials, then write the reports. We would arrange for a calibrated sound source to be towed by a quiet ship. Meanwhile, we'd pepper the ocean with listening devices and figure out how well the model predicted where the sound was heard. Not very good was the answer. They had been working on this model for 12 years. This was Lockheed scientists, oceanographers and programmers and whatnot. But anyway, I wrote the reports and sort of knew what I was doing. Got out, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, so I chose a social science that I wanted to go in the social sciences, but I didn't want to give up the math and the sort of statistical stuff that I had. So I went into demography, which at the time was sort of a very quantitative social science, still is. And so I went to Michigan, Ann Arbor, graduate school, got my way paid for pretty much through the GI Bill and I always had fellowships. Got a PhD in 4 years in demography, and that was stepped into the academic world.
Wow. So you were really very fortunate not to have actually fallen that. I mean, you were really.
Oh, I was, yeah. I served as a courier in Europe occasionally. They always strapped a 45 to my waist. I never knew how to shoot the thing if I would have had to, because I was currying top secret stuff around being intelligence. But no, I never had to shoot a gun.
That's incredible. And then, okay, so you've graduated and now you become a professor then? Or what did you do?
Well, sort of. I went off to Williams College for my first job, a little liberal arts school up in the Berkshire Mountains of northwestern Massachusetts. Williams was a place, I didn't really like it, and yet it was absolutely delightful. It was a nice place to be, but it was a really pretty stuffy New England college, and I had graduated from the University of Michigan, and it was clear most assistant professors just were not getting tenure. I was sort of told, well, it's a nice place to spend some time, but you don't expect to be here for life, which was fine. But now this is 70, starting 73. So it was the 70s, and there was a lot going on in the communities movement, in the anti-war stuff, and lots of activism. I was involved with all of that. I got deeply involved with the anti-war movement while I was in the Navy, and I had an interview with my boss, this admiral. This incredible story. He called me in and he said, "Well, I know you've been doing this stuff," and he said, "You and I are sort of alike." He said, "I led a carrier task force off the coast of Vietnam several years ago." And he said, "I never minded that." And then he said this astonishing thing. He said, "I just wish we had gone in on the right side," which was just, it was our way of sort of talking about the anti-war. I was involved in fair housing stuff. Civil rights had passed, but they hadn't reached Norfolk. And so I was involved with a lot of activism in my last couple of years in the Navy. So now I'm at Williams, and it's still the 70s, and got involved with the communities movement. There were a number of assistant professors, 4 families with kids my daughter's age got together. And well, as part of the community, we had dinner together every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 3 years. The last of those years, all the assistant professors rented housing from the college. And so they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, they had one house that was simply too large to rent. And I said, "Well, I'll take that if you'll let me live with another couple." Now, they happen to be public school teachers. And so in 75, I guess, 7 of us moved into this house. And that was my first experiment with shared living. 4 adults, 3 kids, and it was glorious. I look back on that as very, very happy days, and that sort of stuck with me. And now I find myself at the opposite end of my post-career, living in shared housing with other adults, no kids in the house. So got involved with that. I remember in 72, when the first issues of something that was called Communitas was available in kind of the newsstands. This a year later became Communities Magazine, which is the main journal now for the magazine for the communities, people who follow communities and are in communities. So I have every issue of that magazine going back to 72 when the first 2 precursor issues came out. So interested in community really the rest of my career. I was at Williams for 3 years, got an offer to come to the University of Wisconsin, and did so. So I moved to Madison, back into sort of pseudo community. We were part of a dinner group again, what we called an eating group. We met every Monday evening for 12 years. It's just incredible when you think about it. The same families watching the kids grow up and get into trouble, and parents get divorced and all of that stuff. Well,
Do you think did your experience with the military, or, I mean, make you more kind of community oriented? I mean, although when you were a child, I mean, you lived, in this kind of joint family, this extended household, but the environment wasn't great. But
no.
what moved you towards, living in community? Why did you do that?
Was part of the times, I think. Um, it was just the early 70s, the early 60s/70s, communes were being established. And I was following that movement pretty avidly, partly because my broad degree was in sociology, so that had something to do with it, even though my narrow degree was formally in, I'm not much of a sociologist, but was a pretty good demographer. And it just happened. I don't know. It's, during your life, you get drawn to certain things and you sort of do a deep dive, and sometimes you stay there and sometimes you pop out and go elsewhere.
So let's talk about what you're involved with now. I mean, talk about how and Hope and others kind of came together in North Carolina and are
Mm-hmm.
working on, really starting this incredible community.
Yeah. I retired. Let's see, how old was I? I guess I retired at the age of 66 from the University of Wisconsin. And I had been teaching in a new and kind of niche area of statistics at the time. Partly it related to the statistical analysis of demographic data, which at the time neither I nor my demographic colleagues understood the importance of the fact that demographic data violate the fundamental rule of statistics, which is your units of observation are independent. So if you think about it, you pick up a county somewhere in the US, it's a lot like its neighboring counties. So there's this spatial dependence. And that had been ignored. And I discovered it, I sort of remember, but only vaguely. I went to a workshop in this, and I decided that a lot of the work that was being done in my field was being done wrong. So I started to teach in this area. And after I retired, I got contacted by the University of North Carolina, actually a professional colleague who I knew. And they basically said, what would it take to get you down here? We need somebody who does what you do. So I'm now retired. It was hard for Hope to move because she was a musician. She was a professional classical musician, French horn. And she was attached to a horn quartet. She played some with the Madison Symphony regularly for 30 years with the Madison Chamber Orchestra. Moving away from that was hard because there's never any music openings when you come in cold into a new community. Any job that's available, even though they're rare, there's 30 people waiting in line to audition for that position. So she shuttled back and forth to Madison, even though our life was basically here. And so I'm teaching at the University of North Carolina now. We had shaken hands and said, we'll do it half-time for 1 year. And that gradually expanded into more time and a total of 7 years of post-retirement work. And it was wonderful. I loved what I was doing. I loved my colleagues. And it was nice to have that income on top of a retirement income. I mean, it was incredible. That's sort of what padded my retirement in a way to, I don't know, make my current lifestyle sort of possible, although much of that went into what are those 528s or whatever they are, those programs that assist kids in college. So much of that income that I earned at North Carolina went to pre-fund my grandkids' college education. And they're both in very expensive schools right now, so that helps. Let me see, where was I? Yeah, for many, I met Hope in the 90s. My former wife, the mother of my daughter, left, and I was sort of popped free. And Hope and I eventually came together, and it's been a long time now. We're 25 years, almost 26, as long as my first marriage. Anyway, and this is an answer to your question about community. Hope and I, whenever we did something socially or we met a new person or a new couple or something, we had this little code language between us. We'd come home and rather than saying, I really like those people or I really like that person, we would say, they could be in our commune. And that was just, it didn't mean anything. We didn't have a commune, but it was a way of saying, I really like those folks. And we did that for years and years. So now we're in North Carolina and here's how I fell into what now is Common Ground Eco Village. Then it was Harts Mill. Hope had gone up to Madison for Christmas and to do some horn playing. And I was going to join her as soon as the semester permitted it. I hopped on a plane and there was a horrible blizzard going on in the upper Midwest. Snow, Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, all of them, the airports closed down, nothing going on. So I had hopped on a plane and gotten to Philadelphia only to learn that my flight to Wisconsin had been canceled. They said, it'll be days before you get there. So I said, well, can I just cash my ticket in? Because I had a daughter and her family who lived in Philly. So I called my daughter and I said, hey, how's the guest bedroom? You got anybody there? She said, no, it's free. So I spent a good part of Christmas there, then flew back to Chapel Hill a few days before Hope got here. So it's the end of December. And I was just searching the internet for intentional communities and came across Harts Mill. So on the 30th of December in 2012, they were having a tour of the land, and Hope had now returned, and we took a tour, and I've been hooked ever since.
What is that, amazing, how things happen, of course.
Yeah, I know, but that's how life is. It happens to all of us.
Yeah, it's true. So, well, Paul, so describe a little bit about Common Ground. I mean, where are you at and what do you hope to do?
That's a painful question. This community actually had its start in 2008. We and several other present members joined in 2012, and we've been on a slow growth curve. Our problem is we have no deep pockets and we don't know anybody with deep pockets. So we have been self-funding the community and doing it without a developer. We've got a bunch of very bright people in the community. So we're doing it ourselves, which means slow. So we do something when we've got money to pay for it. And that's got to change because we're losing members as fast as we're getting them right now because they don't see a future. And, they come very excited. Oh, this is exactly what I've been looking for. I really want this, but they're not really engaged. So they sit on the sideline sort of waiting. Let me know when you're ready to go. And then they tire of it. They lose interest. The enthusiasm kind of evaporates and they either formally leave or just you never see them again. So right now, and I'm talking like right now, I was working on it today. We're trying to figure out how to get past this roadblock of not having the money necessary to move forward. And we've got a good plan. We're facing some serious borrowing issues. Ultimately, if we're going to build the 30 or so units that the county has authorized, we need, between 10 and $12 million. And I will tell you that the small member pool that we have doesn't have access to that money. So what we've got to do is get things ready to go to a lender who says, it looks like you're now ready to talk, because we can show a way of paying for that construction and permanent financing. And the banks can, the lenders can get it guaranteed for up to 40 years through the FHA programs. So they're just asking us to accumulate enough money to qualify for, for them to talk to us. And we're working very hard on that right now.
Yes, no, I know you've been working very hard, and yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I moved away, and so yeah. So let's say it's 10 years from now, you're now 90. So what would you hope that the community looks like?
Oh, well, that's something that I think about, and several of us talk about virtually every day. It's hard to say. I mean, if I don't play the lottery, but let's say I did and miraculously won a lot of money. That money would go toward building a village. As you know, Mike, we have 112 acres, most of it wooded, about 80 acres, 75 acres or so of woods, a pond, and a dream. That's kind of where we're at. We've got a very good farm that's generating a lot of vegetables that are going to farmers market. We just are almost finished building a new barn, which is a rather impressive project. And I mean, if I had that money, what we would do is pay off all of the remaining pre-development. That is, paying our architect for final engineering drawings that we could send out to a contractor. We would complete all of the engineering tasks related to our wastewater treatment field. All of our wastewater will remain on the land, but it will require a very large drip line system that we have to pump the waste up to. You've seen that field. And right there, and then we'd have to bring in the bulldozers, start doing the grading for the road and the gravel. We'd drop a few more wells. We'd finish off the wastewater treatment field, not just the engineering, but we would get it done. And that work is probably $1 million to $2 million. And we sort of have identified how we're going to get there, oddly enough. We would build the village, and if I had won the lottery and had my say, it would be a housing cooperative. I'm very interested in the modern cooperative movement, and housing cooperatives make a lot of sense to me. And our community seems to understand them as well, although nobody's done as much reading, I guess, as I have on housing co-ops. The farm would be cleaned up a little bit. We'd restore the pond, probably remediate the dam. I had a meeting today, basically starting our orchard. We would get our orchard going, full blast. The orchard is going to be where the wastewater treatment field is, so that we could use that land that's a bit toxic and contaminated, but to feed fruit trees and nut trees and brambles and berries and blueberries and so on. So that's, as you know, that's kind of the image, but we need a ton of money to get there. And we're feeling our way through. I mean, alternatives, we're considering now dropping the idea of a housing co-op and just allocating to tell somebody through a land lease that you can build a house here, and sort of front end the housing process where everyone's responsible for their own mortgage, their own, designing their house. Hopefully they would pick something from the template that we've already got, hire their contractor and get the thing built. That would save the community the need for all these millions and transfer it to the individual members. Well, that's not appealing to some of our members who don't have much money.
But in
So
all,
who knows?
okay. So Paul, somewhat of a philosophical question. I mean, some people do retire. I mean, you said you've retired, but obviously you haven't retired. Do you see, yourself working on, I don't know, social issues for, as long as you're on the earth? Do you see yourself ever slowing down?
Probably not. I don't know what I would do if I slowed down. And I enjoy it, unless I get really stressed out, at which point I have to stop for a while. But no, I think that I'll continue to work on this project, which I do, I don't know, 50 or 60 hours a week, I suppose. And on the social activism side, I'm, I guess, the member who maybe is most forcefully trying to drive that part of what we say we're all about, but we don't do a lot with. I don't think you know about this, but just up the road in Effland, there is about 100 acres where a large chain from Texas wants to build, believe it or not, in this little rural community of, I don't know, 700 people. They're aiming to build the world's largest service plaza. 120 pumps, the second to the longest car wash in the world, in an area that is a watershed that's protected. And so I'm part of the group that's opposed to that. I testified last week to the county commissioners. We've been doing some demonstrating. I'm rather hopeful that this county commissioner, the Board of County Commissioners won't approve it, but one never knows. So you keep at it. You just don't let up.
Makes a little sense. Just makes a little sense.
Yeah.
Have any of your, now you have how many children?
Oh, just one daughter.
You have one daughter and you have how many grandchildren?
2.
So are any of them, have they picked up on this kind of, social activism?
I'm going to say no. They're too involved in school. They're at a demanding school. They're both at Swarthmore College, just outside of Philadelphia. Very strong liberal arts, Quaker college. It's a wonderful place. My daughter and her husband went there. They met there. Sometimes it's called the Quaker Matchbox. And they're too involved with school. But I do know, we Zoomed with them just yesterday. They're really politically where I would love for them to be. They're very left. I remember my daughter telling me, I can't remember what the issue was. Oh, somebody in their presence was talking about Buttigieg, or what, I can't remember how he says his name, but he's married to another man. And somebody said, well, people really liked him only because, he represented. And she said, my granddaughter, who's a sophomore in college, said, Mom, why would anybody ever say that? That's just crazy. Let him be what he is. It's not because he's gay and because he's married and it's cool. Just lay off, just accept it. And my daughter was pretty impressed by that, as was I. And my grandson is the same way. He's majoring in biology, but with a focus on sustainability studies. So he's he's in the sustainability world, and we talk about that. And my granddaughter, they're both very bright kids. In their junior year, they both, I don't know how they, each, I should say, when their junior year in high school came, they scored a perfect 800 on the SAT. And I don't know how anybody does that. Both of them. If one did and the other scored 740 or whatever. But they're both pretty bright. They went to a good public school in Philadelphia, and they're off to a pretty good start. And my granddaughter surprised me by saying, "I'm really interested in economics." I said, "Really? That's a horrible field. Why would you want to do that?" She said, "No, don't say that." She said, this is important stuff. And she said, "You need to understand how the economy is working in order to turn it around." So she too is there. They don't have the time to be street activists, but I think they've got the temperament to bring them there. So that's nice.
Yeah, no, it sounds like they're following or learning from your footsteps. That's for sure. So,
Yeah, I don't know.
so is there anything else that you want to tell me, about your life at all? Any good
Oh,
stories?
I don't know. I'm 80 years old. You alluded to that.
Yeah.
I like where I am. I like what I'm doing. We're trying to make shared housing work here. So I live in a house with 7 adults. Partly as kind of proof of concept to the community that it's possible. People say, "Oh, I could never live like that," but then they see us getting along pretty well, and they say, "Oh, well, yeah, that looks kind of interesting. Maybe I could do that." But so I'm happy where I am. I'm delighted to be working on something important. I sometimes say I'm not doing this. I can't remember who said it. It's a quote that I hear periodically that nothing important is worth doing if it can be done in one lifetime, or something to that effect. And so I don't mind that I would like to live on the land before I die. And I hope I can do that. But if not, that would be all right. It would still be worth the effort. And I tell my grandkids this when they say, "Hey, how's the village going?" And they really don't care, but it's a polite question. And I tell them I'm doing it for them. I mean, that's sort of why I do it for myself too. But if there's some other motivation, it's because I would love to leave the world a better place than I entered it. And that ain't going to happen. The world is a mess compared to what it was, well, even pre-World War II. So yeah, we went through a war, and then there was the euphoric post-war economic, social, family building, housing. Life was good until we got into more wars. So, I like what I'm doing, but the world is in a pretty big mess right now, politically, environmentally, socially. The planet is dying, and we're responsible for that. So we're trying to create at Common Ground an example of living that is as sustainable as you can be at this moment in time. That would be electric power, solar, drawing our water from the land rather than from a utility, not poisoning the water with chemicals, having a waste treatment facility that remains on the land, live in modest, clustered, green, which also means expensive, housing, and spending a nice day in the garden, helping the farmers out, getting their stuff to the market or into CSA boxes or whatever. It's a wonderful dream. It's not a reality yet. It still is a dream, and you keep pushing toward, awakening from the dream and making it happen.
Well, thank you, Paul. This has been so enjoyable
It's
to hear about
great.
your
I
work.
really appreciate it.
And yeah, really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Mike. Blessed New Year to you and your family. So we'll be in touch.
Thank you.